The sleeping engineer's office was quiet that morning. The soft hum of computers and the occasional clicking of keyboards filled the room. It was just another day at the Tesla headquarters. But nobody knew it would become a day they would never forget. Sundar Pichai, the guest of the day, had flown in early. He walked in with his usual calm smile, wearing a simple shirt and jeans, holding his notebook. Many employees stopped what they were doing just to watch him enter. His presence had a strange way of making people feel both nervous and respected at the same time. He nodded politely to everyone as he walked through the rows of desks, asking quiet questions, taking notes, and listening more than he spoke. People whispered to each other as he passed by, wondering what he was thinking. Then it happened. Someone gasped loudly from the back of the office. Sundar turned toward the sound, and everyone followed his gaze. There, slumped over his desk, was a young engineer named Arjun. His head rested on his arms. A faint snore broke the silence of the room. The entire office froze. A few coworkers exchanged worried glances. Some looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. One manager whispered, "He's finished." Everyone knew how serious it was. To sleep at work, especially during such an important visit. Sundar stood still, his eyes fixed on Arjun. For a long moment, nobody dared to move. The air felt heavy with fear and judgment. One of the supervisors finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I am so sorry, sir," he began. He is new. I will handle this right away." But Sundar held up his hand, stopping him. The room went quiet again. Sundar slowly walked toward Arjun's desk. Each step echoed in the tense silence. Arjun didn't wake up, completely unaware of the dozens of eyes watching him, completely unaware of the storm about to come down on him. When Sundar finally reached the desk, he didn't speak right away. He looked at Arjun for a long moment, then gently placed his notebook on the table. Suddenly, Arjun stirred. He lifted his head slowly, blinking as the fog of sleep cleared. When he saw Sundar standing right in front of him, his eyes went wide with horror. I'm so sorry," he stammered. His face turned pale. His hands shook. His voice broke off, and he looked down, too ashamed to meet Sundar's gaze. Everyone in the office held their breath, waiting for Sundar to say something, to reprimand him, to show his anger, but Sundar didn't say a word. Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat down next to Arjun. That simple act shocked everyone. Whispers rose behind them. Nobody understood what was happening. "Are you okay?" Sundar finally asked, his voice quiet and kind. Arjun swallowed hard. Yes, sir. No, sir. He stopped, tears beginning to well in his eyes. Sundar waited patiently. Finally, Arjun spoke. "I haven't been sleeping much. My father is sick, and my mother can't take care of him alone. I've been working here during the day and taking care of him at night. I guess I just couldn't stay awake anymore." The entire office was silent now, stunned. Nobody had known. Sundar nodded slowly, his face softening. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I'm sorry about your father. How is he doing?" Arjun blinked, surprised by the question. He's stable, but it's hard. The hospital bills, everything." Sundar placed a hand gently on the young man's shoulder. "You are strong," he said quietly, "and you're doing your best. That's what matters." Everyone in the room could feel the emotion in the air now. Some even looked down, ashamed of their own quick judgments. Just when it seemed the moment had settled, Sundar stood and turned to the supervisors. "He will take the rest of today off, and tomorrow too. Make sure he gets the support he needs." Then, he looked around the room, his eyes meeting each person's gaze. "We are not here to break people. We are here to lift them." And with that, he picked up his notebook and began walking away. But just before he reached the door, a voice called out from the back. It was Arjun. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling. "Why? Why would you be so kind? You don't even know." Sundar stopped in the doorway. His back still to the room, he spoke without turning around. "Because once Someone was kind to me when I needed it most. Then he walked out, leaving the entire office in stunned silence. As the door closed behind him, Arjun sat back down, his eyes full of tears. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. But little did he know, this was just the beginning, because what Sundar discovered next would shake the company to its core, and not everyone was ready for the truth. Asterisk. The secret Felicity office didn't return to normal after Sundar walked out. Even though his footsteps had faded and the door had closed behind him, his words hung heavy in the air, like clouds before a storm. Arjun sat motionless at his desk, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Around him, coworkers avoided each other's eyes, pretending to type or shuffle papers, but their thoughts were elsewhere. Nobody could forget what Sundar had said. We are not here to break people. We are here to lift them. It was as if the whole room had been turned upside down. And yet a strange kind of warmth lingered in Arjun's chest, even through his exhaustion. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen. But Sundar wasn't finished. Not even close. While the office tried to settle back into its rhythm, Sundar had not actually left the building. Instead, he had quietly slipped down a side corridor, walking with quiet determination toward a part of the office few employees ever visited. His notebook was still in his hand, but now he held it differently, as though it carried not just notes, but questions that demanded answers. He stopped in front of a small glass door marked Archives. The hallway was dim here, the buzzing of the lights above sounding louder than usual. Sundar pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell of paper and dust filled his senses immediately. This was where old project files and employee records were stored, a forgotten place in a company that prided itself on looking forward, not back. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the rows of cabinets, then walked to the far end where a single desk sat under a flickering bulb. An older clerk looked up, startled to see him. "Can I help you?" The clerk asked, his voice uncertain. Sundar nodded politely. "Yes," he said softly. "I'd like to see the personnel files for the engineering department. All of them." The clerk's eyes widened. "All of them, sir. That's hundreds of files." Sundar smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, wait," he replied. Hesitantly, the clerk stood and began unlocking drawers. Soon the desk was covered with thick folders, stacked high and uneven, each one labeled with a name and a number. Sundar sat down quietly, opened the top folder, and began to read. At first, it seemed ordinary. Names, dates, job titles, performance reviews. But as he moved from file to file, a pattern began to emerge. A dark, unsettling pattern. Several employees, like Arjun, had notes about being late or falling asleep at work. Others had unexplained gaps in their attendance. Some had resigned suddenly after glowing reviews the previous year. And then there were disciplinary reports, dozens of them, citing vague reasons like inadequate focus or lack of team spirit. But what caught Sundar's eye most was the handwriting on these reports. Though the names at the bottom were different, the words themselves were the same. Not meeting expectations. Does not fit culture. Recommended for termination. Always in. The same sharp, hurried script. He closed one folder and opened another. Again, the same phrases. And again. And again, his brows furrowed as he leaned back in the chair, the soft creak echoing in the still room. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been quietly pushing people out, one after another. His mind flashed back to Arjun's tearful explanation. His father sick, his mother overwhelmed, his own exhaustion. Yet the only thing on his record was a single word. Inattentive. Sundar stood, pushing the chair back slowly. He looked at the clerk. "Can you tell me who writes these reports?" he asked. The clerk hesitated. "Sir, usually it's the department head, Mr. Ray." Sundar's expression didn't change, but his silence deepened. He closed the final folder, stacked them neatly, and thanked the clerk. Then, without another word, he left the archives and began walking back toward the main office. His steps were slower now, his mind racing. If what he suspected was true, this wasn't just about Arjun. It was about everyone. Asterisk when he reached the main floor again. People were still working nervously, their eyes darting toward him as he passed. He gave no sign of what he had just discovered, though inside him a quiet storm was building. He stopped briefly by Arjun's desk. The young engineer looked up, startled. Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder again, this time with more weight, as if to say, "Hold on. You are not alone." And then Sundar walked straight to the glass-walled corner office of the department head. Inside, Mr. Ray was seated behind a massive desk, his suit immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted. He was typing something on his computer and didn't notice Sundar at first. When he finally looked up, his face froze for a split second before forcing a polite smile. Our pichai, he said, standing. "What an honor. Please, have a seat." But Sundar didn't sit. Instead, he closed the door behind him and stood very still. The folder of notes still in his hand. The silence between them stretched painfully. "Long, Mr. Ray's smile began to falter. Asterisk. Is something wrong?" he asked finally. Sundar opened the folder slowly, letting the papers slide out onto the desk one by one. The same sharp handwriting stared up at them. "Tell me," Sundar said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "How many people have you written off as inattentive or not fitting the culture this year?" Ray blinked, caught off guard. "Well, it's part of maintaining standards. We need to make sure the team performs at its best." Sundar leaned forward slightly. "At its best. Or at your convenience?" The question hung in the air like a blade. For the first time, Mr. Ray looked nervous. He glanced at the door, then back at Sundar, unable to find words. But before he could answer, there was a sudden knock at the door. Both men turned to see the clerk from the archive standing there, breathless, holding another folder. This one thicker, older, with a red sticker that simply said "Confidential." "Sir," the clerk said, his voice trembling. You should see this." Sundar took the folder without a word, his eyes narrowing as he opened it. The first page alone made his stomach drop. Inside were records not just of employees being pushed out, but of secret meetings, altered performance reviews, even falsified documents. At the bottom of the stack was a memo signed by Mr. Ray himself, outlining a quiet strategy to replace certain employees with more agreeable candidates. Sundar looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Mr. Ray's face had gone pale. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, so hard his knuckles turned white. The silence was deafening. "I think," Sundar said softly, though his words were sharp enough to cut glass, "we have much to talk about." And just as he spoke, the door to the office swung open again. This time, it wasn't the clerk. It was a woman no one expected to see. She stepped in confidently, her eyes locked on Sundar, her voice firm. "You don't know the whole story yet," she said. Sundar turned toward her. Surprised. She dropped a small flash drive on the desk between them. "This," she continued, "will show you everything." The entire office outside watched through the glass, too far away to hear but unable to look away. Inside, Sundar picked up the flash drive slowly, his expression calm, though his mind was already bracing for whatever was coming next, because now it was clear the sleeping engineer was only the beginning, and what this flash drive contained could destroy more than just one career. It could expose the entire system. Asterisk, the flash-driven room seemed smaller now. The air was thick, heavy, with unspoken questions and unspoken fear. The woman who had just walked in stood perfectly still, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm yet intense. Her presence alone made both men stiffen. Sundar studied her for a long moment. She was not someone he recognized from the office. Her badge simply read Anika, and she carried herself like someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. Mr. Ray's betrayed his shock. His lips parted slightly, and though no words came out, the way his fingers tightened around his desk revealed everything. He knew her. And he hadn't expected her to appear. Anika stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She placed one hand lightly on the desk, her eyes moving between Sundar and Ray. "I've been watching this for months," she began, her voice low but steady, almost like she was afraid the walls themselves might listen. "What you found in those files is just the surface. It goes deeper than you think. This drive has everything. Emails, recordings, spreadsheets, proof of what's been happening. And who's been helping him?" She gestured at Mr. Ray without even looking at him. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening. Sundar held the flash drive in his hand, feeling the faint weight of it, as though it already carried the burden of many lives inside. He turned it over slowly, noticing the faint scratches on the metal casing. This wasn't just a device. It was a weapon, one that could cut through years of lies. "How did you get this?" Sundar asked quietly. His voice was soft but carried. An edge of steel. Anika hesitated for a second before answering. "Because I was one of them," she said finally. "One of the ones he tried to push out. But instead of leaving, I stayed. I stayed and I watched." The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Sundar's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. But what he saw in her gaze was something he understood very well. Quiet determination born from pain. Behind them, the office outside had gone quiet again. Employees pretended to work but kept sneaking glances through the glass, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding behind the door. Mr. Ray cleared his throat suddenly, as though trying to regain control of the situation. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "Anyone can fabricate documents. This is nothing but a personal vendetta from a bitter employee." Anika turned her head toward him, and for the first time her expression hardened. "Is that what you told yourself when you falsified my reviews? When you told me I didn't fit after 3 years of flawless work? When you whispered to others that I was a problem because I asked too many questions?" The color drained from Ray's face. His mouth opened, but no words came. Sundar finally sat down in the chair opposite Ray, setting the flash drive carefully on the desk between them. His calmness was more frightening than anger. "If what's on here is true," Sundar said softly, "then this isn't just about you. It's about a culture you allowed to spread. A culture of fear. Of cruelty disguised as standards." He reached for his notebook and opened it, flipping through the pages until he stopped at a list of names. At the top was Arjun's. Beneath it were several others, all marked with short, gaming notes. Inattentive, not a team player, lacking vision. "These are not just names," Sundar said, his voice quiet but heavy. "These are people. Every one of them trusted this place to see their worth. And every one of them was betrayed." Anika took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Ray. "You never thought anyone would notice. You counted on people being too tired, too scared, too busy to fight back, but you underestimated one thing." Ray finally spoke, his voice rising in desperation. "And what's that?" Anika leaned in, her voice just above a whisper. "That even broken people can still stand up." There was a long silence after that. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the muted murmur of the office outside. Sundar reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB adapter. He plugged the flash drive into his notebook, the faint click echoing louder than it should have. The screen lit up, and a folder appeared almost instantly. Inside were hundreds of files, labeled clearly. Organized meticulously. Sundar opened the first one. It was a recording. He pressed play. A crackling voice came through the speakers. It was unmistakably Ray's voice, though lower, colder. "She's too curious. We can't have someone like that around. Get rid of her. Mark her file. She'll leave on her own soon enough. They all do." Anika's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. Sundar's eyes stayed fixed. On the screen, he opened another file, an email this time. "We can't keep hiring people who actually care. They ask too many questions. Better to find ones who just do as they're told. Each document, each recording, each message stacked on top of the last, painting a chilling picture. This wasn't a few bad decisions. It was a deliberate strategy. Ray shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice cracking slightly. This is how things work here. This is how you keep order." Sundar closed the notebook slowly, letting the silence fill the room again. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried a quiet fury that made the hairs on the back of Ray's neck stand up. "Then maybe," Sundar said, "it's time to change how things work." Before Ray could reply, Anika spoke again, her tone sharper now. "You haven't even seen the worst of it yet." She reached into her bag and pulled out a second, smaller flash drive. This one had a red sticker, just like the confidential file Sundar had seen earlier in the archives. She set it down on the desk and slid it towards Sundar. "What's on this?" Sundar asked quietly, though he already sensed the weight of it. Anika hesitated. Her eyes darkened slightly as she spoke. "This one," she said, "proves it doesn't." "Stop at him. This goes higher, much higher. People you wouldn't even imagine. And if you open it, you can't unsee it." The words sent a chill through the room. Sundar stared at the small drive, his fingers resting lightly on it. Outside the glass walls, the employees watched more openly now, sensing that something monumental was unfolding right before their eyes. He looked up at Anika. Her eyes were steady but sad, as if she already knew the choice he was about to make. And then he looked at Ray, whose face had gone completely pale, his hands trembling slightly now, though he was trying hard to hide it. Finally, Sundar closed his notebook, slid the red sticker drive into his pocket, and stood. "Thank you," he said quietly to Anika. Then, without another word, he turned and walked to the door. Just before he stepped out, he paused. His back still to them, he spoke. Softly, but his words carried to everyone in the room and beyond. When people think nobody sees them, that's when the worst happens. I see you, all of you. And this ends now. And with that, he opened the door and walked back into the office. The entire floor fell silent, all eyes turning to him as he passed, their expressions a mix of fear, hope, and awe. But as he walked toward the elevator, his mind was already racing. Because now, with the second drive in his pocket, he knew that what lay ahead would be far bigger and far more dangerous than he had imagined. And somewhere above him, somewhere, in the floors he hadn't yet reached, someone was already watching. Someone who would do anything to keep the truth buried. Asterisk, the shadow above the elevator doors closed behind him with a soft metallic thud, sealing Sundar inside a small, quiet box of mirrors and faint lighting. He stood still, the hum of the machinery rising around him as he pressed the button for the highest floor. The tiny red-stickered flash drive sat heavy in his pocket, its presence impossible to ignore. He could feel its edges pressing through the fabric as though it was alive somehow, carrying not just data but secrets that had the power to unravel everything. As the elevator ascended, Sundar's mind played back the voices and faces from the last hour. Arjun asleep at his desk, trying to hold his life together. Anika appearing from the shadows with proof that even he hadn't dared imagine. Ray, pale and desperate, exposed in his own office. And now, whoever was above all this, the shadow that Anika had hinted at, but refused to name. The elevator slowed as it reached the top floor, and with a faint chime, the doors slid open. The space before him was different from the other floors. The air felt cooler, crisper somehow. The lights were softer, warmer, and the walls were lined with polished wood panels instead of the sterile white of the lower offices. Thick carpet muted his footsteps as he stepped out. There was no hum of chatter here, no clatter of keyboards, no phones ringing. Just silence. At the far end of the hall, a large door stood closed. A plaque next to it bore no name, just the word executive. Sundar walked slowly, feeling each step sink slightly into the thick carpet. He could feel eyes on him even though the hall appeared empty. Faint cameras in the corners tracked him, tiny red dots blinking faintly. Somewhere, someone was watching. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. Instead, he stood there for a long moment, listening. He thought he could hear faint voices on the other side, low, hurried, but impossible to make out. Then silence. Again, he reached out and pushed the door open. Inside was a spacious office, the kind of room that seemed designed to impress. A long window stretched across the far wall, revealing a view of the city below. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in muted orange and deep blue. A massive desk stood near the window, and behind it sat a figure Sundar did not recognize. The man was older, his hair perfectly combed back, his suit flawless. His hands were folded on the desk, and when Sundar entered, he didn't stand. Instead, he regarded Sundar with a faint, knowing smile, the kind of smile that suggested nothing surprised him anymore. "Mr. Pichai," the man said, finally, his voice calm and deep. "I wondered when you would make your way up here." Sundar said nothing, but closed the door behind him and walked to the center of the room. The man gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, sit." But Sundar remained standing, his eyes locked on the man's. "You know why I'm here?" Sundar said quietly. The man chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Oh, I imagine you think you do," he replied. "But tell me, what exactly do you believe you found?" Sundar reached into his pocket and set the flash drive down on the desk, letting it slide to a stop in front of the man. "This," Sundar said simply. The man looked at the drive, but didn't touch it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers under his chin. He murmured. "The red drive. I was wondering when that would surface." His words caught Sundar slightly off guard. He had expected denial, defensiveness, even anger, but not this calm, detached acknowledgement. The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Did Anika give it to you?" Sundar stayed silent. The man smiled faintly again. "She's clever, more than I gave her credit for." He finally reached out and picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers, as though it were just another trinket. "You think what's on here scares me?" The man asked softly. Sundar single quotes gaze hardened. "It should." But the man only chuckled again, this time louder, though still without joy. Or pichai, he said. "You really don't understand, do you? This company doesn't run on kindness. It doesn't run on fairness or transparency. It runs on control, and those who control the narrative control everything." He set the drive back down gently, then leaned back again, crossing his arms. "What you've seen so far," the man continued, "the falsified reviews, the forced resignations, raised little games, all of that is nothing. It's noise, distractions. The real work happens here." He gestured to himself and then to the towering shelves of books and binders behind him. "Here," he said quietly, "is where the decisions are made. And trust me, there is no room for sentiment in these decisions. If you try to fight this, you won't just lose, you'll burn." His words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and acrid, but Sundar didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his voice even quieter than before, but each word carrying the weight of iron. "The thing about shadows," Sundar said, "is that they only exist where there is light. You may think you've hidden everything, but light always finds a way through." The man's faint smile faltered just slightly at that, though he tried to mask it by standing. "Bold words," he said softly, "but dangerous." He picked up the flash drive and held it between two fingers. Then, with a sudden motion, he pressed a button under his desk, and a faint click sounded. A hidden drawer slid open, revealing a sleek metal shredder built right. Into the desk he moved to drop the drive in, but Sundar's hand shot out, catching the man's wrist with surprising strength. The two men locked eyes, one calm but fierce, the other now visibly irritated. "Don't," Sundar said simply. The man hesitated, his hand still hovering above the shredder. At that exact moment, the door behind them burst open. Both men turned. Anika stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing with determination, holding her phone high. "You might want to reconsider," she said coldly. The faint sound of recording played from her phone, the entire conversation they just had. Every word. The man froze completely now, his confident mask finally cracking as the realization hit him. Anika stepped fully into the room, her voice sharper now. You think you can control everything, but the people you hurt, the ones you thought were too weak to fight back? We see you now. The man slowly lowered his hand, letting the flash drive fall back onto the desk. The room fell silent, except for the faint, steady sound of the recording still playing. Sundar finally let go of his wrist and picked up the drive again, slipping it back into his pocket. He turned to Anika and gave her a quiet nod of respect. But before either of them could speak, the man laughed suddenly, low, bitter, and chilling. You think this is over? He asked, his voice darker now. You've no idea what you've started. You think you've exposed me. But above me there are others, and they don't care about drives or recordings. They don't care about you at all. His laugh grew louder as he sank back into his chair. You've just lit a fire you can't put out, he said. And when it burns, it won't just take me with it. It will take you too. His eyes glinted with something that neither Sundar nor Anika quite named. Not fear, but something colder. And just then, Sundar's phone buzzed faintly in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a single message flash across the screen. Leave the building now. They know. He looked at Anika, who was already reading her own phone. Her face suddenly pale. Without a word, they both turned and walked quickly out of the office. But in his mind, Sundar already knew. Whatever shadow was above them, it was watching. And it was waiting. As the elevator doors closed behind them, and the lights above flickered faintly. Sundar gripped the flash drive tighter in his pocket, because now it wasn't just about saving the employees. It was about surviving what came next. And somewhere above them, the real battle was only just beginning. The trapped elevator hummed softly as it descended, the numbers above the doors glowing and fading one by one. Sundar stood still, his shoulders squared, his face expressionless. But inside him, a quiet storm was building. The message on his phone replayed in his mind over and over. Leave the building now. They know. Beside him, Anika clutched her phone tightly, her breathing quick but controlled, her eyes fixed on the mirrored doors as though she could already see the danger waiting outside. The elevator slowed to a stop on the ground floor, and the doors slid open with a faint hiss. The lobby was almost empty now. The cheerful chatter of employees from earlier was gone. The reception desk sat abandoned. The air felt heavier somehow, the light dimmer. Sundar glanced around quickly, noting subtle changes. 2 men in dark suits standing near the exit, their eyes locked on him and Anika. A third stood by the revolving doors, pretending to check his watch, but clearly watching them too. They're already here. Anika whispered, barely moving her lips. Sundar didn't reply. Instead, he began walking forward at a steady pace. Not too fast, not too slow. Anika matched his steps perfectly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The 2 men near the exit straightened slightly as he approached. Just before reaching the doors, Sundar stopped and turned toward the reception counter. He leaned over it casually, pretending to glance at a brochure, but his sharp eyes caught what he'd been looking for, a narrow side hallway partially hidden behind a large decorative plant. He straightened up again, slipping his hand into his pocket, fingers brushing against the flash drive. Then, in one smooth motion, he nodded to Anika, and the 2 of them veered left into the hallway. The men at the door reacted almost immediately, but Sundar and Anika had already disappeared around the corner. The hallway was narrow, lined with supply closets and maintenance doors. Fluorescent lights flickered above them, casting long shadows on the walls. They moved quickly but quietly, their footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. Where does this lead? Anika asked breathlessly. Service elevator, Sundar murmured. If we're lucky. They rounded another corner and found it, a dull gray door with a small metal plate that read staff only. Sundar pushed it open and ushered Anika inside. The service area was cold and utilitarian, all exposed pipes and concrete walls. They followed the narrow corridor to the end, where an old freight elevator waited. Sundar pressed the button, and the metal doors groaned as they slid open. They stepped inside, and Sundar slammed the door shut behind them. Inside, the elevator felt ancient, its walls scratched and dented, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. Sundar pressed the button for the basement, and the elevator lurched into motion. Anika finally let out a long breath and leaned against the wall. "We're not safe, are we?" she asked quietly. Sundar shook his head. "Not yet." The elevator groaned its way down, and when the doors finally opened, they stepped into a dark, sprawling underground parking garage. Only a few dim lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows between the rows of cars. It was cold here, and their footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. Sundar's phone buzzed again. Another message, this one shorter. "They're waiting. Outside, too. Level 3 stairwell is clear. Go now." He showed the screen to Anika, who nodded silently. They moved quickly, weaving through the parked cars until they reached the stairwell door. Sundar pushed it open slowly and peeked inside. Empty. The faint smell of metal and dust rose from the concrete steps. They climbed quickly, but quietly. Their footsteps deliberate, measured. Somewhere above them, faint sounds echoed. Doors opening, hurried voices, footsteps on tile. The building was waking up to their escape. When they reached the third level, Sundar paused, listening intently. All was quiet. He cracked the door, opened slightly, and peeked through. The third level of the garage was emptier, quieter. No figures in sight. They slipped through the door and moved quickly toward the exit ramp. The cool night air hit them as they emerged into the open, the streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt dock. But just as they reached the sidewalk, a black car screeched around the corner, its headlights cutting through the dark. Sundar grabbed Anika's hand and pulled her into a narrow alley before the car could close the distance. In the alley, they pressed themselves against the cold brick wall, breathing hard, listening as the car slowed and rolled past, its engine low and menacing. Sundar held his breath until the car turned another corner and disappeared from view. "We can't keep running like this," Anika whispered. Her voice was low but steady, though her eyes betrayed the fear she was trying to suppress. "They're everywhere," Sundar nodded slowly. "That's the point," he murmured. "They want us afraid. Afraid people make mistakes. Afraid people give up." Anika swallowed hard. "So what now?" Sundar pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it up between them, its faint red sticker catching the light from a distant street lamp. "Now," he said softly, "we find someone they can't touch. Someone who can bring this into the light." Anika shook her head. "And who would that be?" "Everyone in that building answers to the same shadow. Even outside. It's risky. What if they've already bought everyone?" Sundar's gaze hardened slightly, though his voice remained calm. "Then we keep moving. We keep looking. Someone, somewhere, still cares about the truth. We just have to find them before the shadow finds us." He pocketed the drive again and looked down the alley, where the faint glow of city lights beckoned. But just as they began walking toward the end of the alley, a figure stepped out from the darkness ahead. A tall man in a dark coat, his face hidden in the shadow of the hood he wore. He stood perfectly still, blocking their path, his hands at his sides. "You shouldn't have come this far," the man said, his voice deep and calm. Anika stiffened, taking a step back instinctively. Sundar stayed where he was, his eyes locked on the figure. "Who are you?" Sundar asked quietly. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step closer, his footsteps echoing faintly in the narrow alley. "You've seen too much," the man finally said. "And now you've set something in motion that can't be stopped." He reached into his coat slowly, and Sundar tensed, his fingers brushing the edge of his pocket where the flash drive lay. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a plain white envelope and tossed it toward Sundar. It landed at his feet, sliding slightly on the rough concrete. "You have one chance," the man continued. "Open that when you're alone. Decide if you really want to go any further." And without another word, The man turned and disappeared into the darkness at the far end of the alley. His footsteps fading into silence. Sundar and Anika stood frozen for a long moment. They only sound their own breathing and the distant hum of the city beyond. Finally, Sundar bent down and picked up the envelope, feeling its unexpected weight in his hands. He glanced at Anika, who stared back at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He slipped the envelope into his jacket and straightened up. "We don't stop," Sundar said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." But deep inside, even he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited inside that envelope could change everything, and not necessarily for the better, because somewhere above them, hidden in the layers of power and silence, the shadow was already moving, and the trap had only just begun to close. Asterisk. The final choice of the envelope sat untouched on the small wooden table in front of Sundar. Its edges still perfectly sealed, its weight heavier now than it had felt in his hands earlier. He and Anika had taken refuge in a quiet corner of a nondescript coffee shop, far from the glowing glass towers of the office. The place was empty this late at night, the faint hum of a refrigerator and the clink of a distant spoon the only sounds that broke the silence. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm, cars flashing past, people walking by without a clue of what hung in the balance just beyond the glass. Anika sat across from him, her face half lit by the dim bulb overhead, her eyes fixed on the envelope, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since they sat down. Sundar, too, was silent, his gaze locked on the white paper as though it might begin speaking on its own if he stared long enough. Finally, he reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the seal. "We don't know what's inside," Anika said quietly. Her voice was low but carried a quiet urgency. "Once you open it, you can't go back, you can't unsee it." Sundar glanced at her, his eyes calm but resolute. "We already crossed that line," he replied softly. "You broke the seal carefully." The sound of tearing paper louder than it should have been in the quiet room. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper and a small black keycard, the kind used to open secure doors. He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the words. The note was, handwritten, neat, deliberate letters. "The truth is bigger than you imagine. If you want answers, come alone. Bring nothing else. Use the key card at the building on 12th and Main, basement level. Midnight. If you don't, you'll never know how deep this goes." Sundar set the note down and picked up the key card, turning it over between his fingers. The card was unmarked, cold and smooth. Anika leaned forward, her voice tight now. "It's a trap," she said. "You know it is? They're drawing you in, making you think you have a choice when really, there is no choice." Sundar looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "There is always a choice." The clock on the wall ticked louder now as they sat in silence. Finally, Sundar stood. "I have to know," he said simply. Anika stared up at him, her eyes wide with something between fear and admiration. She didn't argue this time. She just nodded. When Sundar stepped back out into the night, the city felt different somehow, sharper, colder. He kept his hands in his pockets as he walked, feeling the weight of the key card pressing into his palm through the fabric. Every streetlight cast long, strange shadows that stretched across his path, and every sound of footsteps behind him made him glance over his shoulder. But he kept moving. The building at 12th and Main looked abandoned. At first glance, its windows were dark, its walls faded and cracked. But as Sundar approached, he noticed a faint glow behind the door, a tiny red light blinking above a card reader. He paused for just a second before sliding the black card through the reader. The light turned green with a soft beep, and the door unlocked. That asterisk inside. A long staircase led down into darkness. The faint smell of metal and earth filled the air as he descended, his footsteps echoing on the concrete steps. When he reached the bottom, he found himself in a cavernous room lit only by a single overhead bulb. Asterisk.